it's easy to look at this and be like, well, I'm not as bad as Carmine Falcone. I might justify a couple things to myself. I might justify why I can eat a second dessert. I might justify why I can have another drink, whatever, right? But I'm not Carmine Falcone. Well, sure. And also, I think, at least for me, I can see myself in that. And it's a little bit scary. And it's like you said, it's like Doctor Strange. You almost have to consider always not what can I do for myself, but what can I do for somebody else? Because as soon as even the smallest thing, my consideration is like, well, I should do this for me. And like, I deserve this. Like, that's the risk of falling into the Carmine Falcone syndrome.
Well, and the good things that we see about him, right? Like he is very successful for a long period of time, right? And the reason that he's able to do that is because he has a very strategic mind. He's building things on top of each other. He's trying to set up a sustainable system, right? But also, like his superpower is he actually is really good at sensing what other people need and want. It's just that he does the immoral thing with that superpower, and he says, "Okay, great. Now, how can I push them in the direction of doing what I want?" Rather than oh, where how can I help them the most, or how can I potentially set them up to succeed, or how can I teach them how to avoid their own failure modes, right? He's very clearly identifying other people's weaknesses. Like he's good at that, and that's a skill that a leader should aspire to. But then helping them work through them rather than encouraging them to succumb to them might be a better something we would encourage. So the power dynamics, like what you choose to do when you have power, but also the consequences of not doing that are what we see comes back to him, right? Is the consequences of like he doesn't have anybody he can trust. He doesn't have anybody that is actually loyal to him.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about those power dynamics because we've kind of been skirting around it. And of course, power dynamics are natural. There's anytime there's two or more humans in a room, there's or even animals, there's some level of power dynamics going on, right? And that doesn't mean that like the human that is has more power in a position is necessarily a better human or anything like that. In fact, often it is the person who should have the most power who chooses to lay that down or to serve somebody else instead, like wouldn't that be the greater human? But what we see here is he kind of, like we talked about, he builds this castle. Carmine Falcone builds this castle of power dynamics where the only way that he can relate to another human is through holding something over them. Through, like, we see that with Selena, right? His daughter. He is immediately like, she's distraught. Of course, she's using what she learned from him and is trying to, she's trying to manipulate him, but she's distraught. And the first thing he's thinking is like, okay, how do I figure out what she wants and then hold that over her so that I can get what I want? And so it's not possible for him to have a healthy relationship anymore. And then Brian, for us, for the practical application, it's it's to recognize that those power dynamics, it's empty because as soon as you have the power that you can hold over somebody else, what you're holding in your hand is a pile of dust. Basically, it doesn't fulfill.
You use the phrase really like the pathology of control, like the how that's this it's almost a disease of the mind of like I have to be in control. And it seems to me like the times when I succumb to that, the times when I see people succumbing to that, right? It's almost invariably fear, right? It's I'm afraid that something bad is going to happen, so I have to be in control so that I can keep the bad thing from happening, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more with Batman and Riddler in the next episode. But in the context of Falcone, that fear causes him to never trust anybody. It causes him to not have any relationships based on trust. It causes him to not ever get anything positive back from anybody. And so it's sort of perpetually like he just lives afraid all the time. Like, and all he can do is ride the wave of trying to stay ahead of the fear by being more in control. But that's not really winning, right? It's just surviving.
No, it's just emptiness in the end, right? It's like you said, yeah, it's just surviving. It's just surviving so that you can continue to just fight away another meaningless battle.
Right. And that's because, it's because as we keep talking about with magnanimous leader, like the goal is to be somebody that can aspire to a goal that is larger than yourself and can motivate other people to pursue that same goal. If you don't actually believe in anything larger than yourself, then you're kind of screwed. Like you're not gonna that's not available to you. But but you can't build anything that will outlive you. You can't build an organization that works when you're not present. You can't build a group of people that will be able to sustain things or come back and help you when you falter, unless you're willing to trust them, unless you're willing to empower them, unless you're willing to interact with them in a way that isn't solely based on fear. And so this is what we see is he falls into the dead end, and then he just lives in that dead end until it finally catches up with him. But what we're trying to encourage in magnanimous leaders is this: even if you have the fear, like, look for the opportunities to trust. Like, if you have the fear but you can sense other people's motivation, you can start to get a sense of what they need and what they want. You have the opportunity to deploy trust. You have the opportunity to deploy hope for a bigger picture goal. And those are things that you can leverage into something that will then give you energy back, that will then not require you to be in control all the time, that will then potentially outlive you.
Yeah, and if you're in an office environment or whatever it might be, and you might even be convinced that, I just need to get a little bit more power so that I can do good with it. So that I can, because I'll do better than the current boss is doing or whatever it is, right? But I've been there. I've thought that before. And that in those moments, it's tiring. It really drains you to be thinking that way of like, I just need a little bit more control. I mean, we do it in our own minds. Like, I just need a little bit more control so that I can have a peace of mind. When in reality, there's no peace of mind on the other side of that thought process. I just need a little more control. So in the opposite of it is you got to flip the script. You got to do what Batman does with Selena Kyle. She has the opportunity for once she has the power over Falcone when she's holding the gun pointed at him. And he's like, no, don't do what he does. Instead, do the opposite. He would kill you. For you, like, you let him live. And that is what's going to bring you peace. That is what's going to bring you success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And the fact that he's there in that moment is they're doing something. She was off, she went a little bit rogue, and she was off doing a thing without him, but he went in not for his own goals, but actually to help her. Right? He's like, "Oh, this is going to go badly. I've got to go. I got to be available to support somebody." And so that's a thing that Carmine Falcone would never in his life have done. He's like, "Oh yeah, wow, she's in real trouble. I think that's not going to work out for her. I'm glad I'm not there." Like, he didn't have anybody in the world that he would have done that for. And so he then didn't have anybody in the world that would have done that for him, which, again, pays off in this movie, but is not a stretch to imagine that in the real world.